On June 11, 1891, Sheriff Raymond Coulter stood behind the Delgado Ranch at first light, counting the crosses again. There were 7 of them now, arranged in a crooked line along the ridge where the wind never fully died. 3 of those crosses he had driven into the ground himself, using a mallet that still hung on a nail in his office in Cold Fork, Montana territory. The other 4 had been placed there before his time as sheriff, or during years when he had chosen not to ask questions. He counted them the way a man counts debts he cannot pay. 7. Always 7. He turned his horse before the sun cleared the pines and rode back toward town without looking over his shoulder, because looking back had stopped changing anything a long time ago. By noon he was at his desk, sipping coffee gone cold, when the stagecoach from Miles City rolled into the square with more dust on it than a full week of travel should produce. The driver climbed down and helped a woman step out onto the plank walk. She wore a dark traveling dress cut for the city, and she carried a leather satchel pressed tight against her ribs, the way a person carries something worth more than the horse that pulled her there. She was 32 years old, tall, with the tired eyes of a woman who had recently buried a husband and refused to be pitied for it. Her name was Emily Delgado, and she had come from St. Louis with a folder of papers signed by a lawyer she had met exactly once. Raymond watched her from his office window. He knew who she was before she asked, because a letter had reached him 3 weeks earlier from that same St. Louis lawyer, and he had read it 4 times before locking it in his bottom drawer. He knew she was the great niece of Jacob Delgado. He knew she believed the old man was dead. He knew she was about to sign her name onto the deed of a ranch that had already killed 7 people the county could name, and most likely, a few it could not. She stepped inside his office at 12:15, the little brass bell above the door announcing her the way it announced every stranger. Raymond stood, took off his hat, and offered her the chair across from his desk. He poured her a cup of coffee, even though he already knew it would sit untouched. Widows from St. Louis did not drink Montana coffee the first day. They learned it later, or they left before learning anything at all. "You'll be Mrs. Delgado," he said. "I received word you might come." "Raymond Coulter?" she asked. "The lawyer said to speak with you first." "Sheriff Coulter is fine." He sat back down. "I knew your Uncle Jacob. I knew him well." The past tense landed in the room the way he had rehearsed it, quiet and neat, without a single fold left showing. He was a solitary man toward the end, kept to himself. The ranch out beyond Bitter Creek has been sitting mostly empty for a while now. Emily set the satchel on the desk between them and slid out a stiff envelope tied with red ribbon. Raymond looked at it and for a moment felt the count behind the ranch begin to shift in his mind from 7 toward the number he had been afraid to reach for years. Emily untied the ribbon slowly, the way a person handles paper that has traveled too far to risk tearing at the end of the journey. She spread 3 documents across Raymond's desk: a deed of inheritance signed by a probate judge in St. Louis, a letter from Jacob Delgado's attorney, dated 4 years earlier, a copy of a death certificate marked with the county seal of Cold Fork, dated the 17th of March, 1888. Raymond looked at the death certificate longest. He had signed it himself. His signature was still there in dark ink. Still steady, still a lie. "He left everything to my late husband first," Emily said. "Thomas passed in November. The inheritance came to me by default since Thomas had no other family. I did not know Jacob Delgado. I met him once when I was 7 years old. I remember he gave me a peppermint stick and said very little else." She paused, folding her hands on the edge of the desk. "The lawyer told me the ranch is small, but productive. Cattle, A-stream, a house that needs work. I have nowhere else to go, Sheriff. I sold what I could in St. Louis. I brought what I could carry. I would like to see the property today, if there is someone who can take me out there." Raymond looked at her hands. They were steady. Not the hands of a woman running from something, but the hands of a woman who had already stopped running because there was nothing left behind her worth running from. He recognized the look. He had seen it on his own wife, the year she died. He had seen it on his daughter Clara, the summer of 1878, before Jacob Delgado carried her out of a flooded ravine on his back and set her down in front of the courthouse without a word. I can take you out this afternoon, Raymond said. It is about an hour by wagon. The road is rough. There are things you should know before you decide. Then tell me now. He rose, walked to the coffee pot, poured himself a second cup he did not want, and returned to the desk. He chose his words the way a man crossing thin ice chooses his steps. The Delgado Ranch has a history. Accidents, mostly. Your uncle lost a foreman to a horse in 1879. A ranch hand fell down the well in 1882. A traveling preacher took a fever there in 1885 and did not come back down the mountain. There have been others. 7 that I can recall clearly. The land is hard, Mrs. Delgado. The winters break men who do not respect them. I am telling you this because you deserve to hear it before you sign anything. He watched her face for the flinch. It did not come. 7 deaths in how many years? About 30. And none of them were investigated? They were investigated. He held her eyes. Findings were accidental in every case. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she nodded once and reached for the deed. Mr. Coulter, my husband died of consumption in a rented room above a butcher's shop. My son died at 11 months of a fever no doctor in St. Louis could name. I have buried 2 people I loved in the space of 3 years. I am not afraid of a hard land. I am afraid of the alternative, which is going back to nothing. She signed her name across the deed in a hand that did not tremble. I would like to see it now, please. The wagon left Cold Fork just after 2 o'clock. Raymond drove, and Emily sat beside him with the satchel between her boots. The road climbed east through low hills of yellow grass, past a creek that ran clear over pale stones, and into a stretch of pine that swallowed the sound of the wheels. Neither of them spoke for a long time. Raymond had been quiet on this road for years, and Emily was learning already that Montana quiet was not the same as St. Louis quiet. St. Louis quiet had walls around it. Montana quiet had nothing to lean against. The Delgado Ranch came into view around a bend where the trees fell back from the road. Emily leaned forward. The house was a 2-story log structure with a shingle roof gone silver from weather. A wide porch wrapped the front. A barn stood to the east, larger than the house, its main doors open to the wind. A smaller building sat off to the north, half attached to the main house by a covered walkway, the kind of annex a family adds when someone in it needs to be kept close, but not underfoot. Behind the whole place, the ridge rose gently, and Emily could not yet see what stood on top of it. She would, though. She would see it before the week was out. Someone has kept it up, she said. Raymond glanced at her. A caretaker comes by, a man named Silvano Reyes. He lives in a cabin 2 miles south. He feeds the chickens, keeps the roof patched, checks on the cattle. Your uncle's estate paid him a small stipend. He will continue if you want him. I want him. They pulled into the yard and stepped down. Emily walked to the porch first, and Raymond followed a few paces behind, because he had decided somewhere between town and here that he was going to let her find things at her own speed. He had made a choice long before she arrived. Now he intended to keep it, one small omission at a time. The front door was not locked. Emily pushed it open and stepped into a front room that smelled of cedar smoke and old paper. A long dining table stood in the center. A stone fireplace filled the far wall. Shelves lined the walls, and the shelves were full of books. More books than Emily had expected. Some in Spanish, some in English. One thick volume that looked like a family Bible in Latin. She ran a hand along the spine of one book and felt dust rise into the light from the west window. This is a house that has been reading itself alone for a long time, she thought. Kitchen is through there, Raymond said. 2 bedrooms upstairs. There is a study behind the fireplace wall. Your uncle used it. The key is on a hook by the back door. And the annex? He hesitated for less than a breath. She caught it. Emily Delgado had been married to a man who lied about his health for 18 months before dying of it. And she had learned to hear the shape of a hesitation the way a piano tuner hears a slack string. She said nothing. She simply waited for him to speak. Storage mostly, Raymond said. Old tools. Some winter feed. Your caretaker uses it. I would not recommend going in there until Silvano can show you what is what. There is a loose floorboard near the door. A person could turn an ankle. Emily nodded slowly. Thank you, Sheriff. I will wait for Silvano then. She did not intend to wait, but she was willing to say so. Raymond stayed another half hour, walking her through the front rooms, pointing out the pump handle for the kitchen sink, showing her how to open the flue on the parlor stove, warning her about a soft plank on the second step of the porch. He was thorough in the way a man is thorough when he wants to feel he has done something honest inside a larger dishonesty. He left just before 4 o'clock, promising to send Silvano out the next morning, promising a delivery of flour and salt from the town store within the week, promising nothing about the annex. Emily watched the wagon disappear down the road, and only when the last sound of the wheels had faded did she turn back to the house and stand very still in the middle of the yard, listening. There was smoke coming from the annex chimney. It was thin, almost invisible against the pale June sky, but it was there. She had not seen it earlier because the wagon had come in from the west, and the annex chimney sat on the far side of the walkway. Now she stood facing north, and the smoke was rising in a slow, steady thread that only a lit stove produces. Storage buildings do not have lit stoves. Storage buildings do not have anything to keep warm. Emily walked to the annex slowly, without pretending she was not walking to the annex. She crossed the covered walkway, put her hand on the plank door, and knocked twice. She waited. She knocked again. From inside came the sound of a chair scraping across a wood floor, then footsteps, uneven, slow. The footsteps of someone who had not hurried anywhere in a very long time. The door opened. The man in the doorway was small, thin, and old, in a way that had less to do with years than with a life spent carrying something too heavy for the frame carrying it. His hair was white and long enough to touch his collar. His beard was trimmed neatly. His eyes were pale gray, the color of river stones in shallow water. He wore a clean cotton shirt buttoned to the throat and a dark wool vest, and he looked at Emily with the mild curiosity of a man who receives visitors so seldom that he has forgotten to be surprised by them. You would be the girl from St. Louis, he said. His voice was soft, unhurried, and clearer than his frame suggested it should be. Sarah's granddaughter, Thomas's wife. Widow, Emily said. Thomas passed in November. I am sorry to hear that. He stepped back from the doorway. Come in, please. The stove is warm. I was making tea. I do not receive many callers. I hope you will forgive the state of things. Emily hesitated on the threshold. The sheriff had lied to her. Whatever else was true or not true in this house, that fact was now settled between her and the man in front of her. She was standing in front of Jacob Delgado, whom the county records said had been dead for 3 years and 3 months. She could feel the death certificate folded in the satchel back on the parlor table, and she could feel Raymond Coulter's neat signature at the bottom of it, and she could feel the exact weight of the choice she was about to make. She stepped inside. You are Jacob, she said. I am. They told me you were dead. Yes, he turned toward the stove, lifted a kettle, and poured hot water into a chipped porcelain cup. That is the arrangement. Please sit down. There is a great deal to explain, and I am not sure how much time I have left to explain it. Emily sat in the chair he offered, a straight-backed wooden chair pulled close to the stove. Jacob handed her the porcelain cup and lowered himself into a chair opposite, moving with the careful economy of a man who had learned that every wasted motion cost him something later in the day. The annex was one long room. A narrow bed stood against the far wall, made up neatly with a wool blanket folded at the foot. A small desk sat under the window, and on the desk lay a leather-bound ledger closed, with a black ribbon marking a page near the middle. Emily's eyes went to the ledger and then away from it, because she had lived long enough to know that some things should not be looked at until you were invited to look at them. How much did Sheriff Coulter tell you? Jacob asked. He told me you died in March of 1888. He told me the ranch has a history of accidents. He warned me about 7 of them. 7? Jacob nodded slowly. That is the count he keeps. It is not wrong, It is only incomplete. He blew across the surface of his own tea, which he had not yet drunk. I asked him to tell you as little as he could. He is a decent man, in the way that decent men often are, which is to say that he draws his line, and then he stops asking why the line is there. I am grateful to him. You should not blame him for what he did not say. Why are you alive? Because I asked to be dead, and Raymond Coulter agreed. He set the cup down. 3 years ago, I became too old to run this ranch in any way the county could see. I was 71 then. I am 74 now. I could not ride. I could not sit through a full evening at the town hall. I could not go into Cold Fork without someone asking me questions I no longer wish to answer. My caretaker, Silvano, has been with me since he was a boy of 19. He is 53 now. He runs what needs running. I write what needs writing. 3 years ago, a traveling man came to this ranch to spend the winter, and he did not survive it. That was the 7th cross. After I buried him, I sat down with Raymond in my parlor, and I told him I was tired. I told him I wanted the ranch to pass to whoever came next, and I did not want the county watching me while I waited. Raymond signed a paper. He is not proud of it. Neither am I. But it is the paper he signed, and it is the reason you were told I was dead. Emily looked at him for a long moment. The 7th cross, she said. You buried him. I did. Did he die of an accident? Jacob did not answer immediately. He picked up his tea and drank half of it in one slow swallow, and when he set the cup down again, his hand was steadier than it had been a minute earlier. He looked at Emily with the pale gray eyes and did not blink. Every death behind this ranch is an accident, he said. That is the word the county uses. It is the word Raymond uses. It is the word on every certificate. I am an old man, Mrs. Delgado. I am not going to sit here on the first afternoon of your acquaintance and use a different word. Emily's eyes moved to the ledger on the desk. Jacob followed her gaze, and for the first time since she had entered the room, he smiled. It was a small, tired smile, the smile of a man watching a candle he had lit years ago finally reach the wick of another. You saw it, he said. Good, he rose from the chair and crossed to the desk. He laid his hand flat on the ledger for a moment, the way a priest lays a hand on scripture before opening it. And then he lifted it and carried it back to the stove and set it in Emily's lap. The leather was worn soft at the corners. The black ribbon slid loose when she opened the cover. I will not tell you what to do with what you are about to read, Jacob said. I only ask that you read it here, in this room, before you carry it anywhere else. I have kept it for 31 years. Another hour will not damage it. Emily opened the ledger to the first page. The handwriting was neat, small, slanted slightly to the right, the hand of a man who had been taught penmanship as a boy and had never allowed himself to grow careless with it. The first entry was dated April 4th, 1860. It read, Marcus Halloran, foreman, fell from the roof of the west barn while repairing shingles. Buried the same day. $240 received from his brother in Boston for the settlement of his employment contract, an unpaid loan, and the return of his personal effects. Emily read the entry twice. Then she turned the page. The second entry was dated August 19th, 1863. Elias Whitcomb, ranch hand, drowned in the West Stream during high water, buried the following morning. $180 received from an aunt in Philadelphia against a debt he had left with the ranch. Personal effects returned by post. The third entry was in 1866. The fourth in 1869. The fifth in 1874. The sixth in 1882. The seventh in 1888, and the entry for the seventh was longer than the others, and the handwriting in it was less steady, as if the man writing it had grown older between the sixth cross and the seventh, in a way he could no longer disguise on the page. Reverend Josiah Pell, traveling minister, contracted fever during winter residence, buried in the ridge plot, $312 received from the Methodist Mission in Denver against pledged support and personal notes held by this ranch. Emily kept turning pages, but there were no more entries after the seventh. The rest of the ledger was blank paper, cream-colored, waiting. She closed the book and held it in her lap with both hands. She did not look up. The stove ticked as the metal cooled on one side and warmed on the other. Outside, a jay called once and did not call again. Emily could hear her own heart, slow and even, and she was surprised at how slow and even it was, because the arithmetic she was doing in her head was not arithmetic that ought to have permitted a slow heart. Every one of them owed you money, she said. Every one of them owed the ranch money. Or someone connected to them did. Yes, and every one of them died at a time when the ranch needed the debt paid. Yes, how? Jacob had returned to his chair. He folded his thin hands in his lap and looked at the stove instead of at her, and when he spoke his voice was the same soft voice he had used to offer her tea. Marcus Halloran was pushed. Elias Whitcomb was held under. The two men in 1866 and 1869 were shot at night, and the wounds were dressed to look like accidents before the county came. The woman in 1874 was given something in her food that stopped her heart. The man in 1882 was pushed down the well. The Reverend Pell was left in a cold room with a window open for 3 nights while he was already sick. He paused. I did some of it myself. The rest was done by men I paid, who are all dead now. Emily did not move. The ledger sat closed in her lap, heavier than it had been a minute earlier, though nothing on it had changed. She kept her eyes on the stove, because she understood without needing to think about it that if she looked at Jacob Delgado in this moment, she would see a small, tired old man in a clean cotton shirt, and she would not be able to hold what he had just told her against the size of him. It was easier to hold it against the iron of the stove. Why are you telling me this? Because you signed the deed, he said. The ranch is yours now. Whatever it is yours. You are not 7 years old, and you are not a stranger to loss. And I will not send you into a house that has this in its walls without letting you decide whether to stay in it. You could have burned this book. I could have. I chose not to. Why? He did not answer for a long time. When he did, his voice was quieter, and the pale gray eyes were fixed on something a great distance from the annex. Because a man who has done what I have done owes the world at least the courtesy of a record. If I had burned it, then somewhere a family in Boston would still believe their brother slipped on a shingle. Somewhere a mission in Denver would still believe a good man took a fever. I do not have the standing to ask forgiveness from any of them. I did not want to also take from them the truth of what happened. The book is what I have instead of a confession, because a confession would have cost Raymond Coulter his position, and Raymond Coulter has a daughter. Emily looked up at him then. Clara, Jacob said. She was 15 years old in the summer of 1878. There was a flood on the Musselshell that June. She was riding out to a neighbor's homestead with a basket of preserves, and her horse spooked at a snake in the ravine and threw her, and the water was rising, and she caught her boot in a root, and she was under the surface for I do not know how long before I came down that road. I was 58 then. I was strong enough. I pulled her out and I carried her to the courthouse in Cold Fork, and I set her on the steps, and I walked away without giving my name, because I was already what I am, and I did not want Raymond Coulter to owe me anything. He found out who I was 3 days later. He came out to this ranch. He shook my hand. He did not know then what I had already done 4 times behind this house. He learned it slowly, over the years. By the time he understood, he had a debt he could not put down. He is a decent man, he drew his line. His line is his daughter's life. I have never asked him to move it. Where is Clara now? She is 38 years old. She is a Methodist missionary in the Dakota Territory. She has never married. She writes to her father every second Sunday. If Raymond Coulter is arrested for signing a false death certificate and for concealing 7 murders, Clara Coulter will lose the small salary the church pays her, and she will lose the letters, and she will lose the memory she has of the man who raised her. That is what my confession would cost her. That is the price Raymond has already paid for his line, and he has paid it every day for 13 years. Emily closed her eyes. The ledger was very heavy in her lap. And the 8th cross? She asked. Jacob did not answer. He rose from his chair, took the empty porcelain cup from her hand, and refilled it at the stove without asking whether she wanted more. He set it back on the small table between them and sat down again. His hands trembled now in a way they had not trembled at the start of the conversation, and Emily understood that whatever store of strength the old man had been drawing on for this hour was running low. "There is no eighth cross," he said. "Not yet. There has not been a guest at this ranch in 3 years and 3 months. Silvano and I live here alone. I do not have the strength to open the ledger again in my own hand. That is one of the things I wanted you to know. Then why not burn it now? Why not close the account?" "Because the ranch is in debt, Mrs. Delgado." Emily opened her eyes. Jacob nodded slowly. "You did not know that." The lawyer and St. Louis did not know it either, because the debts are held privately, in this county, by 3 men who have been patient with me because I am old and because they respect Raymond. There is a note against the cattle that comes due in October. There is a mortgage against the north pasture that comes due in April of next year. There is a personal loan from a merchant in Cold Fork that will be called the day I am confirmed dead. The ranch produces enough in a good year to cover its own running. It does not produce enough to clear what is owed. It has never produced enough. That is what the book in your lap has been for. That is the arithmetic behind every cross on that ridge. Emily set the ledger on the small table beside her cup. "You are telling me I have inherited a ranch that cannot pay its own debts." "I am telling you that you have 3 choices," Jacob said, "and I would like to lay them out for you plainly, because I owe you that much and because I do not know how many more clear afternoons I have. The first choice is that you take this book to Sheriff Coulter tomorrow morning. He will read it, he will resign, he will most likely be tried. His daughter will learn what her father has been. She will lose her position and her letters and the man she remembers. Silvano will be questioned and may be held. I will be arrested, though I doubt I will live long enough to reach a courtroom. The ranch will be seized and sold to cover the debts, and there will not be enough. That is one choice, and it is a clean one, and I will not think less of you if you make it." He paused, drew a slow breath, and continued. "The second choice is that you sell the ranch as quickly as you can, take whatever the buyer will pay, and leave for a place where none of this can find you. The debts will fall on the buyer. The book you will burn or bury. Raymond will be safe. Clara will keep her letters. I will die here or somewhere else within the year. Silvano will find other work. Whoever buys this ranch will run it as ranches are run, and the next guest who comes here in winter with debts of their own will simply meet the same land that has always been here. There will most likely be an 8th cross eventually. It will not have your name on the ledger above it, because there will be no ledger. That is the second choice." Emily waited. "The third choice," Jacob said quietly, "is that you stay." Emily did not answer him that afternoon. She thanked him for the tea. She picked up the ledger, tied the black ribbon around it, and carried it back across the covered walkway to the main house. She set it on the parlor table beside the deed and the death certificate and the letter from the St. Louis lawyer. She sat down in front of the cold fireplace, and she stayed there until the western light went the color of old brass and then the color of nothing. She did not weep. She had used up her weeping in a rented room above a butcher's shop the previous November, and she had not been given any more since. She did not sleep that night. She walked the house from front room to kitchen to the 2 upstairs bedrooms and back again, running her hand along the shelves of books, opening drawers she had not been shown, lifting the lid of a cedar chest at the foot of the larger bed and finding inside it a folded quilt in a wedding ring pattern, half finished, with the needles still tucked into the seam where the last hand had left them. She did the arithmetic Jacob had laid out for her. She did it 3 times. Then she did a different arithmetic. She thought about the rented room. She thought about the 11-month-old grave in the Catholic cemetery outside St. Louis and the larger grave beside it, and the winter she had spent selling her husband's tools one at a time to a pawnbroker on Market Street who had known exactly what she was and had priced accordingly. She thought about the woman she had been at 22 and the woman she was at 32, and the distance between them, which was not measured in years. At dawn, she walked back to the annex. Jacob was already awake. He was sitting at the small desk in his cotton shirt and dark vest, and he had a fresh sheet of paper in front of him, and a pen, and an inkwell. He did not turn when she came in. He knew who it was. "I have decided," she said. "Yes, I will not go to the sheriff. No, I will not sell the ranch. No, I will stay." Jacob nodded once. Slowly, he set the pen down. He did not turn around. "There is a condition," Emily said. "The book stops. The old entries remain, because they are a record, and I will not destroy a record. But there will be no new entries in your hand or mine. Whatever the ranch owes, we will find another way to pay it, or we will lose it honestly. If the note comes due in October and we cannot meet it, we will sell the cattle and let the north pasture go. If the mortgage comes due in April and we cannot meet it, we will sell the north pasture and let the house go. If the merchant in Cold Fork calls his loan the day you are confirmed dead, then he will call it, and I will pay what I can, and I will leave with whatever remains. There will not be an eighth cross. That is my condition." For a long moment, Jacob did not move. Then he lifted his hand from the desk and laid it flat over the blank sheet of paper in front of him. He nodded again, slower this time. "Agreed," he said. "That is a better ledger than mine." Emily stood in the doorway of the annex and watched the old man's shoulders, and she understood that she had just made a promise she believed she could keep. On a June morning, in a house she had known for less than one full day. 10 years later, on a bright June afternoon in 1901, a new sheriff rode up the road to the Delgado Ranch for the first time. His name was Thomas Ainsley. He was 29 years old. He had been elected in the spring after Raymond Coulter finally set down the badge he had carried for 22 years and retired to a small house on the edge of Cold Fork, where he sat on the porch most afternoons and read letters from his daughter Clara, still a missionary, still writing every second Sunday. Raymond had walked Thomas Ainsley through the county in April. He had introduced him to the ranchers, the merchants, the doctor, the postmaster. He had mentioned the Delgado Ranch in passing. He had said it was run by a widow named Emily Delgado, who had inherited it in 1891 from a great-uncle, and who kept her books in order and paid her taxes on time and gave no one any trouble. He had not said anything else, because there was nothing else that needed saying. Thomas Ainsley pulled his horse up in the yard just after 2 o'clock. Emily met him on the porch. She was 42 years old now. Her hair had gone a shade lighter at the temples. She wore a work dress and boots that had seen 10 Montana winters, and she carried a coffee pot in her hand because she had seen him coming up the road 20 minutes earlier and had put water on. "Sheriff Ainsley," she said, "please come up. I was told to expect you sometime this month." They sat on the porch. She poured him coffee. He drank it. He asked her the questions a new sheriff asks a rancher he has not yet met. She answered them plainly. Cattle count. Water rights. The names of her 2 ranch hands, Silvano Reyes, now 63, and a younger man named Emmanuel, who had come up from Texas 6 years earlier. The condition of the north pasture, which she had not lost. The condition of the roof on the barn, which she had replaced in 1897. She spoke the way she had learned to speak in the years since Jacob Delgado had died in the annex in the winter of 1893, quietly, without haste, without any of the sentences leaning too far in one direction. Thomas Ainsley found her easy company, and he stayed longer than the call required. And when he finally stood to leave, he glanced past the barn toward the ridge behind the house, where the June wind was moving through the yellow grass. "Are those graves up there?" he asked. Emily looked up at the ridge. There were 8 crosses now. The 8th was smaller and newer than the others. It stood a little apart. "Family graves," she said. "The old ones are from before my time. My great-uncle Jacob is buried up there. He passed in the winter of 93. Silvano's wife is up there as well. She died of a stroke in 98. Good people. I keep the grass cut." Thomas Ainsley nodded. He touched the brim of his hat. He rode back down the road toward Cold Fork. Emily stood on the porch until he was out of sight. Then she went inside. She walked to the parlor. She opened the drawer of the writing desk. She took out the leather-bound ledger with the black ribbon. She untied the ribbon. She turned to the page after the seventh entry, the page that was still blank, that had been blank for 10 years and would be blank for however many years remained to her. She ran her thumb once across the empty paper. Then she closed the book, tied the ribbon, and put it away. Outside, the wind moved through the yellow grass on the ridge, and the 8 crosses stood in their crooked line, and the ranch went on breathing. Thank you for reading this story. If you found yourself pulled into Emily's June arrival and the quiet arithmetic she had to weigh on that porch, please take a moment to like the video, share it with someone who loves a slow-burning Western, and leave a comment telling me which of Emily's 3 choices you would have made. Subscribe for more stories set in the hard, honest country of the old American West, where every decision has a weight and every silence has a price. I will see you in the next one.